My name is Mara Whitcomb. I'm 32 years old, and for 7 years my parents told everyone in Macon, Georgia, that I had disappeared. Not moved away. Not stopped calling. Disappeared. That was the word my mother chose because it made her sound wounded and made me sound cruel. People disappear when something terrible happens to them. Daughters disappear when they are lost, broken, selfish, or ashamed. But I was not lost. I was in Savannah, working 12-hour shifts as a respiratory therapist, raising a little boy with my last good pieces of strength. The day my brother found me, I was sitting on the yellow porch of my duplex, holding a plastic nebulizer mask against my son's face, while he breathed in slow, shaky clouds of medicine. Elias was 6, small for his age, with Jonah's dark eyes and my grandmother's chin. He hated the machine, but he loved counting the seconds between breaths, so I counted with him. 31, 32, 33. Then a car door shut at the curb. I looked up and saw Colby standing beside an old gray sedan, one hand still on the door, like he had forgotten how to finish getting out. My little brother was 27 now, broader in the shoulders, thinner in the face, but I knew him before my mind agreed to it. He stared at me. Then he stared at Elias. My son lowered the mask just enough to whisper, "Mom, is he from Macon?" Colby's eyes moved past us, through the open front door, to the framed photo of Jonah Reed in his paramedic uniform on the hallway shelf. The color left my brother's face. He stepped backward off my porch, already lifting his phone. "Mom," he said, voice cracking. "She didn't disappear. There's a little boy here." And that was when I knew my mother would not ask if I was safe. She would ask who else had seen me. Please subscribe to support the channel. Here is a fun little challenge. I bet you are watching this video while lying down with your legs crossed right now. If I guessed correctly, type 3 in the comments. If not, type 4. Let's see how many viewers I got right. And if you enjoy this story and would like to support our team, please consider buying us a cup of coffee through the link in the description. Your support helps us continue creating more meaningful, emotional, and captivating stories for you. Thank you so much for your kindness and support. All right, enough talking. Let's begin the story. I stood on that porch after Colby drove away. Elias pressed against my leg, the empty nebulizer cup clicking softly in my hand. My brother had not come inside. He had sat on the curb with his elbows on his knees, staring at the cracked pavement like it might explain 7 years of silence for him. Then he got back into that gray sedan and left without asking one real question. That was the Whitcomb way. Questions were dangerous in my family, because a question required somebody to admit they had heard the answer. To understand how I became missing, you have to go back to May of 2016, to my graduation dinner in Macon. I was 22 years old, newly certified as a respiratory therapist, and proud in a way that almost hurt. I had passed my boards, accepted a full-time job at Memorial Health in Savannah, and bought a navy dress from the clearance rack because I wanted to look like someone whose life was finally beginning. It was not glamorous work. It was lungs, alarms, plastic tubing, and families watching machines do what bodies could not. But it was steady. It had benefits. It had my name on a badge. My mother, Marcy Whitcomb, made pot roast that night and brought out the good plates with blue flowers around the rim. She set my certificate beside a vase of grocery store carnations, like it was another guest at the table. My father, Leland, said grace with one hand around his coffee mug. Colby was 17 then, all elbows and appetite, eating cake before the plates were cleared. For almost an hour, I let myself believe we were celebrating me. Mom kept touching my shoulder when she passed behind my chair. "My girl," she said, "first one in this family with a hospital job." I wanted that sentence to last forever. After dinner, when the forks were stacked and the cake knife was still sticky with frosting, Mom slid a cream-colored envelope across the table. My name was written on the front in her careful church handwriting, the same neat loops she used on donation cards and sympathy casseroles. I smiled because I thought it was a card. But when I opened it, there was nothing inside. No note. No cash. Not even a Bible verse. Just empty space I was expected to fill. Mom patted my hand before I could ask what it meant. "For the house, sweetheart," she said softly. "You're the one who made it out." Dad looked down into his coffee. Colby laughed with frosting still on his fork. "Guess those hospital checks start early." Nobody corrected him. Nobody said I had student loans. Nobody said Savannah rent would take half my paycheck. Nobody said congratulations again. The celebration ended so quietly, I almost missed it. I laughed too, because that is what daughters do when the room teaches them a joke is not a joke. 2 weeks later, I put $600 from my first real paycheck into that envelope and mailed it back to Macon. The next month, another envelope came. By the second envelope, I had already learned to recognize my mother's handwriting before I saw the return address. No note, no explanation. Just my name in those careful church loops, tucked between bills and grocery flyers, like another thing I was expected to handle. That month, Mom said the air conditioner was dying, and Georgia heat was hard on my father's breathing. She said it sadly, factually, the way people talk about weather. I mailed back $800 because arguing with heat, age, and your father's lungs felt like arguing with God. By the end of that first year, the envelopes became texts. By the second, they became Zelle transfers because stamps felt ridiculous when the guilt was already automatic. The amount settled at $1,150 on the first of every month. Then came the extras. $700 for a repairman, $2,300 for insurance, $4,800 for a medical balance no one ever showed me. I worked nights, weekends, holidays, anything with bonus pay attached. Other people used extra shifts to save for vacations. I used mine to stay welcome in a house I no longer lived in. I kept a small green notebook in the drawer beside my bed. Every transfer went in it. Date, amount, reason. Not because I planned to ask for it back. Back then, I still believed love was something you proved by not keeping score. But numbers stayed where I put them. Words in my family slipped around like wet soap. Help, temporary, emergency, just this once. Numbers held still. Some nights, after work, I sat on the edge of my bed in my scrubs, too tired to take off my shoes, and wrote another line under my own name. In February of 2019, I came off 3 long shifts in a row and slept through the first of the month. I woke up on the 4th with my phone hot beside my face and 14 missed calls from Macon. Before I could even sit up, Mom called again. Her voice was not loud. Loud would have given me something to push against. Her voice was flat and clean, like a bill slid under a door. "Your father had to stand at the pharmacy counter with his card declined," she said. I apologized before I asked which medication. I told her the transfer was only 3 days late. I told her I had been exhausted. There was a pause long enough for me to hear Dad coughing somewhere behind her. Then Mom said the sentence that stayed in my chest for years. "You don't get to be tired, Mara. You're the one who made it out," my father added, almost gently. "Just set up automatic payments. Don't make your mother beg." Later, Colby texted, "Sis, Mom gets anxious. Just keep it on the first." No one asked if I had slept. No one asked if I had eaten. That night, I set up the automatic transfer. Then I opened the green notebook and started adding. 3 pages in, my hand stopped moving. The total was already bigger than any savings account I had ever had. I closed the notebook before I reached the end, because some truths do not arrive all at once. They wait until your hands are too tired to push them away. And a few months later, when I drove back to Macon and saw the blue tarp still hanging over the roof I had supposedly helped repair, one of those truths finally knocked. By Memorial Day weekend of 2019, I had stopped expecting my money to stay mine. Still, when Mom asked me to come home after church, I packed a cooler with hospital cafeteria leftovers, drove out of Savannah on 2 hours of sleep, and told myself maybe showing up in person would make me feel less like a transfer confirmation. The Whitcomb house looked the same from the street. White siding, cracked driveway, azalea bushes trimmed into hard little boxes because Dad liked things tidy and quiet. Then I saw the back corner of the roof. The blue tarp was still there. For a minute, I just sat in my car with the engine running. 3 months earlier, I had sent $2,300 for what Mom called the roof repair deposit. She said the contractor needed cash up front, that insurance was dragging its feet, that rain was already getting into the attic. I had skipped a dental appointment and taken 2 extra weekend shifts to send it. But that tarp had not moved. It was sun-faded now, sagging at the corners, tied down with bricks like an old secret nobody expected me to notice. Dad waved from the porch, as if nothing in the world was strange. Inside, Mom had deviled eggs arranged on a glass plate and a pitcher of sweet tea sweating on the counter. Women from street, Bartholomew came and went, soft voices, sharp eyes, the kind who hugged you while checking your shoes. Mom introduced me as our Mara, the hospital girl in Savannah, and everyone smiled like I was proof of something she had raised correctly. I tried to be gracious. I tried not to stare through the kitchen window at the roof I had supposedly helped save. When the last guest left, I asked quietly. I thought the roof was getting fixed. Mom was rinsing forks at the sink. Her shoulders tightened before her face changed, which told me she heard the question underneath the question. It is, she said. The tarp is still up. Contractors are slow. Since February? Dad folded the church bulletin twice, then once more, until it was small enough to vanish inside his palm. Colby opened the refrigerator and pretended to look for something. Mom turned off the faucet and looked at me with sadness already prepared. Do not come into this house interrogating your father, she said. You have no idea how much pressure he's under. Just like that, the roof stopped being a roof. It became my father's dignity, my mother's stress, my tone, my failure to trust. I said, I'm not interrogating anyone, I just wanted to understand. Mom dried her hands and gave me the look she used when church people were close enough to overhear, but not close enough to help. Some children move away and forget what it costs to keep a family standing. Dad said, Drop it, Mara. So I dropped it out loud. Inside, something stayed on the floor. That evening, halfway down, 16, I pulled into a gas station because my hands would not stop shaking. Under the fluorescent pump lights, I opened my banking app and scrolled back to the February transfer. There it was. $2,300. Memo, roof deposit. I took a screenshot. Then another. Then I opened the green notebook on my lap and wrote one line I had never written before. Roof money, tarp still up. When I got back to Savannah, Jonah Reed was waiting outside the hospital entrance with 2 gas station coffees balanced in one hand. He was the paramedic I had started sitting with after night shifts, the kind of man who remembered how I took my coffee without making a performance of it. He looked at my face, then at the phone still clenched in my hand. Mara, he said gently, does helping them always leave you looking like this? I did not answer. That was the first time silence felt less like obedience and more like evidence. By June, Jonah had learned not to ask about Macon too quickly. He would bring coffee after my night shifts and sit beside me on the low concrete wall outside the ambulance bay, letting the city wake up around us. He was 34, a paramedic with tired eyes and careful hands, the kind of man who checked the lid on your cup before handing it over. He never called my family cruel. He just noticed things. My shoulders rising when my phone buzzed on the first. My smile arriving before my voice did, like my face had to brace for impact. By the 4th of July, we had stopped pretending coffee after shifts was only coffee. It was not dramatic. My hair smelled like disinfectant, his radio kept chirping, and half the time we were too tired to finish a sentence. But Jonah had a way of making ordinary care feel almost unfamiliar. He packed extra sandwiches. He changed the wiper blades on my car without announcing it. A week before the storm, he gave me his grandfather's pocket watch and said, "For the days you forget your own time matters." I laughed because I did not know how to receive something that did not come with a bill. 3 weeks later, The storm came in ugly from the coast. By noon, the hospital windows were streaked gray. By 4, every ambulance radio sounded like it was underwater. Jonah's unit was transporting a cardiac patient when a pickup hydroplaned across an intersection and hit the passenger side. The patient survived. I tell people that part because Jonah would have wanted it first. He died before the second ambulance reached them. 34 years old. 1 minute he was a voice on a radio. The next, he was a sentence people lowered their voices around. Lenora Pike, the ER charge nurse, found me in the respiratory supply room with a box of tubing open at my feet. I had not fallen, I had simply stopped standing correctly. She drove me home, took my keys, made tea I did not drink, and sat on my kitchen floor because I could not make myself sit in a chair. I called Macon twice that night. Mom did not answer. Dad picked up on the third try, the television loud behind him. I said Jonah's name, and he paused like he was looking for the right drawer. "Your mother's at a committee meeting," he said. "I'll tell her later." They did not come to the funeral. Savannah was too far. Colby's car was acting up. Mom had responsibilities at Street Bartholomew that weekend, and anyway, she said in a voicemail, grief was private, not a performance. Jonah's crew carried him in borrowed suits, 8 men and women who looked too young to hold that much sorrow. His mother hugged me like she already knew I had no one else there. Lenora stood beside me, one hand on my back, steady as a railing. When the flag was folded, I kept Jonah's pocket watch closed in my palm until the metal warmed. 4 days later, I was sitting on my bedroom floor with Jonah's paramedic jacket in my lap. It still smelled faintly like rain and antiseptic. My phone lit up with a text from Mom. "I'm so sorry about your friend. Will this month's transfer still come on the 1st? I read it once. Then again, your friend. Not Jonah. Not the man I loved. Not the man whose coffee cup was still in my sink. Just your friend," followed by the only question she had come to ask. I sent the money on time. I am not proud of that. Grief makes you obedient before it makes you brave. 2 weeks after the funeral, Lenora marched me into a drugstore because I kept getting dizzy during shifts. I blamed grief. I blamed not eating. I blamed the kind of tired that lives under your bones. In the fluorescent bathroom, 2 pink lines appeared before I finished praying they would not. Later, the doctor said I was already several weeks along, my blood pressure was too high, and stress was no longer just a feeling, it was a risk. I sat in the exam room with one hand on my stomach and understood that someone now needed me to survive more than my family needed me to pay. So when I called my mother in August, I thought I was calling to explain. I did not know she would only hear the word money. In August of 2019, I made a list before I called my mother, a hospital list. Order mattered. Dosage mattered. Too much truth at once could make a person stop listening, and my mother had never needed much of an excuse. On the back of an unpaid electric bill, I wrote 3 lines. Jonah died. I'm pregnant. I can't send money this month. I stared at them until the words blurred, then folded the paper into a square, and held Jonah's pocket watch in my other hand. The doctor had been clear. My blood pressure was too high, my shifts needed to change, and stress was no longer something I could be proud of surviving. It had become a threat with numbers attached. Lenora sat at my kitchen table while I rehearsed the call, arms crossed, watching me like she was afraid I would apologize before the phone even rang. "Tell her the baby first," she said. I nodded. Then I dialed and did exactly what panic told me to do. When Mom answered, I led with the boundary. "Mom," I said, "I can't send money this month." The silence lasted half a second. Then the line caught fire. "After everything we did for you," she said, not shouted, sharpened. "So this is who you are now?" I closed my eyes and tried to get back to the list. "Mom, please." Something happened. But she was already moving faster than truth could follow. The mortgage, my father's medicine, Colby's insurance, the same old list, now sharpened into proof that I was selfish. I said Jonah's name once. I tried to say, "I'm pregnant," but she was talking over me by then. "What happened," she said, "is that you got above us." Then the call ended. I called back twice. Voicemail both times. I sat at the kitchen table with the folded electric bill in front of me, all three truths still written there, only one of them received. Lenora took the phone gently from my hand and set it face down. "You are not a wallet with a pulse," she said. I remember that sentence because it was the first one in weeks that did not ask me to give anything. I tried my father next because some childish part of me still believed there was a door behind my mother if I knocked softly enough. Leland answered from the garage. I could hear a radio and the scrape of something metal. "Dad," I said, "please, Jonah died. I'm pregnant. The doctor says." He cut in before I finished, not angry, worse, tired of being placed near responsibility. "Don't upset your mother, Mara," he said. "She's embarrassed enough." I looked down at my stomach, still flat, still private, and understood that every road back into that family required payment, and my mother decided the price. That night, I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out the green notebook, the screenshots, the transfer records, and every message I had not deleted, because some part of me had always known I might need proof that I had not imagined my life. I did not know yet what I would do with them. I only knew the first of the month was coming. When the reminder lit up on my phone, I watched it until the screen went dark. I did not press send. I thought they would be angry for a while. I did not know my mother was about to turn unpaid bills into a missing person story. The first month, without a transfer, passed quietly. Too quietly. I checked my phone more than I checked my blood pressure, which Lenora hated, but understood. No one from Macon called to ask what I had tried to say on that August call. Not my mother, not my father, not Colby. The silence did not feel like peace. It felt like a room where everyone had stepped out to decide what story they were going to tell when they came back. By September, the story had found its first audience. A woman I used to know from Street Bartholomew sent me a screenshot with no message attached. It was from Priscilla Vance, chair of the women's ministry. Priscilla was not blood. That somehow made it easier for her. She could hold my mother's grief without carrying any of the facts. Her post said, "Please pray for a mother whose daughter has disappeared into pride and silence." No names. Names were not necessary. Underneath, people left folded hands emojis and comments about prodigal children. My mother replied with one red heart. Disappeared was a clean word. It left no fingerprints. It did not say who hung up first, who stopped listening, who turned a boundary into an abandonment. My mother did not say, "Mara is missing." She said she did not know how to reach me. She did not say I was cruel. She let people call me that for her. At coffee hours and committee lunches, she lowered her eyes and said, "We don't really know where she is anymore." Every word was polished enough to pass for grief and hollow enough to hide a lie inside it. By then, my body was making decisions for me. My ankles swelled. My blood pressure stayed high. Lenora drove me to appointments when I was too dizzy to argue and brought freezer meals labeled in black marker. I wrote one letter by hand to Aunt B. Hollis, my father's aunt, because she was the only person in Macon who had ever preferred an ugly truth to a pretty performance. I told her about Jonah. I told her about the baby. I wrote my Savannah address slowly, like putting down a bridge plank by plank. No answer came. 2 weeks. A month. Then winter. I told myself the mail got lost. I told myself B was old, tired, maybe sick. I told myself anything kinder than the thought that even she had chosen my mother's version of me. Elias came early, small and furious, with lungs that needed help learning the world. He came out angry, which I took as a good sign. Lenora stood where family should have stood. When they placed him on my chest, I cried so hard a nurse touched my shoulder and asked if I was in pain. I was, just not the kind she could chart. A month later, another screenshot arrived. Priscilla again. Still praying for Marcy's missing girl. I was holding my newborn son against me, listening to his tiny, uneven breathing, when I read it. Missing girl. Not daughter. Not mother. Not almost widow. Not patient. not person, just a cautionary tale with my face blurred out. That was when I understood they had not only left me alone, they had replaced me. And what I did not know then was that my letter to Aunt B had not disappeared at all. It was simply waiting in the wrong hands. For almost 7 years, I built a life around not knowing. I did not know if Aunt B had read my letter. I did not know if my mother had ever wondered about the child I tried to tell her existed. I did not know how many people in Macon still used my name like a warning. Not knowing became part of the furniture. You stop bumping into it after a while. Then Colby stood on my yellow porch in August of 2026, saw Elias breathing through a plastic mask, and carried the first crack in my mother's story back home. That night, my phone rang with a Macon number I almost did not answer. Colby had texted first. "Aunt B wants to talk to you. She says she has your letters." I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen while Elias slept on the couch with one hand under his cheek. Letters, plural. My knees went loose before the call even came through. When I answered, Aunt B did not say hello. She said my full name the way teachers do when they are trying not to cry in front of a classroom. "Mara Elise Whitcomb," she said. "I have been waiting 7 years to hear your voice." I sat down on the floor because chairs suddenly felt too far away. B was 74 now, her voice thinner than I remembered, but still built out of oak. She told me she had received my first letter in the fall of 2019. Every page. Jonah, the baby. The money. The phone call that ended before I could finish. She had read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope because some truths feel too heavy to leave out in the open. "I believed you," she said. 4 words. That was all. 4 words, and something I had carried in my ribs for years finally set itself down. "Then why didn't you write back?" I asked, and I hated how young I sounded. B was quiet for a moment. I could hear oxygen hissing faintly somewhere near her chair. "Because your mother was in and out of this house every week after my hip surgery," she said. "Mail leaving here did not leave private. She did not have my number then, only the address I had trusted to paper. So B kept my letter, where she kept the things she did not trust other people to respect. Inside her old Bible, under the Book of Ruth. Every Christmas card I sent after that went there too. Elias at 1, wrapped in a red blanket too big for him. Elias at 2, sitting under the yellow porch railing with a toy fire truck in his lap. Elias at 3, with marker on his chin and one sock missing. Elias at 4, holding a paper reindeer from preschool. Elias at 5, squinting in sunlight beside Lenora's old Buick. 6 years of proof. 6 years of breath, fever, birthdays, scraped knees, and tiny sneakers lined by my front door. None of it lost. All of it hidden. Then B's voice changed, not louder, straighter. "In 2024, your mother came over saying she was helping me sort paperwork. She found them." I looked toward the hallway where Jonah's photo sat above the small table. "Found what?" I asked, though I already knew. "All of it," Bia said. "The letter, the cards, your address. Pictures of that boy from the time he could sit up." I closed my eyes. In my mind, I saw Marcy standing in B's kitchen, holding years of my son's face in her hands. "She put them back," B said, "and she never mentioned them again." The room around me seemed to tilt very slowly. For years, I had given my mother one merciful possibility. Maybe she truly did not know. Maybe pride had filled the silence, but ignorance had built it. Bia took that mercy away with one sentence. My mother had known where I was for 2 years. She had seen Elias grow up in Christmas sweaters and preschool crafts. She had known I had not vanished into drugs or shame or selfishness. She had known there was a boy with Jonah's eyes in Savannah, and still let people pray for her missing daughter like I was a grave with no body. B said, "Child, people don't disappear, they get erased, and I have watched your mother hold the eraser long enough." I pressed the phone against my ear and did not trust myself to speak. Then she told me Colby was sitting at her kitchen table, crying into his hands, because he had seen the Bible, the cards, the letter, and the dates. My brother had come to my porch, thinking he had found a secret. Instead, he had found the shape of a lie. When the call ended, I opened the drawer beside my bed. The green notebook was still there. So were the screenshots, transfer records, old messages, and the folded electric bill with 3 truths written on the back. For the first time, they did not feel like a private wound. They felt like a map. I laid Jonah's pocket watch beside them and looked toward the living room, where Elias was asleep under a dinosaur blanket, breathing evenly for once. My mother had spent 7 years telling a story without me in it. Now I had the one thing every lie fears most: dates, witnesses, paper. The next morning, Mom called before sunrise. I watched her name brighten the screen while the coffee maker hissed in the kitchen and Elias slept under his dinosaur blanket, unaware that his grandmother had finally decided I existed again. I let it ring until voicemail caught it, then came the text. "We need to handle this carefully. People are worried." Not sorry. Not I saw the pictures. Not I knew. People are worried. Even then, my mother could not tell the difference between truth and audience. By noon, Priscilla Vance had already turned worry into an event. Colby sent me the church bulletin from Street Bartholomew with a shaking message underneath. I didn't know they were doing this. There it was, in soft blue lettering. "Welcome home prayer service for Marcy Whitcomb's daughter. The last Sunday of August. Fellowship Hall. Coffee and light refreshments." My picture was not on it, but my absence was. No one had asked whether I wanted to be welcomed. Mom had let them print a celebration before she had asked one honest question about why I had stayed away. She called again that afternoon. This time, I answered. Her voice arrived dressed for church. "Mara, sweetheart, there's been a misunderstanding." I stood at my bedroom dresser, looking down at the green notebook, the bank records, Bia's photographs, and the folded electric bill. "A misunderstanding?" I asked. "People love us," she said. "They only wanted to pray you home. Us. Not me. Never me." Then she lowered her voice. "Come stand with me Sunday. No one has to know about the money. We can say grief confused you. We can make this gentle." Gentle. That was the word that told me she was afraid. Not of losing me, not of hurting Elias. Afraid of a room full of women realizing their prayers had been used like curtains. I looked at Jonah's pocket watch beside the notebook and felt something quiet settle in me. "I'll come," I said. Mom released a breath so quickly, it almost sounded like thanks. "Good," she whispered. "Good girl." I did not correct her. Some traps work best when the person setting them believes you are still small enough to step where they point. After I hung up, I called B first. Then Lenora. Then Colby. Elias would stay with Lenora's neighbor until I knew the room was safe. By evening, my kitchen table looked like a legal office run by a tired single mother and a dinosaur sticker sheet. Transfer records went in one folder, screenshots in another. Mom's text after Jonah's funeral printed in black ink, so plain it seemed crueler than memory. Screenshots of the August 2019 call logs. The letter to B. Christmas cards. Elias's photos. Bia agreed to bring the Bible. Lenora agreed to stand beside me. Colby said, "I'll tell the truth." His voice broke on the word truth, like it had waited 7 years to be used correctly. That night, after Elias fell asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed and practiced saying the sentence without shaking. I did not disappear. I stopped paying. The first time, it sounded impossible. The 5th time, it sounded like mine. Outside, summer insects clicked against the porch light, and somewhere in Macon, my mother was probably choosing napkins for a reunion she thought she controlled. For once, I was not walking into my mother's story empty-handed. I drove to Macon alone on the last Sunday of August, with the canvas tote on the passenger seat and Jonah's pocket watch in the cup holder. The highway looked the same as it always had, flat and green and innocent, like roads do not remember what they carry. Lenora followed in her own car because she said no woman should walk into a room like that without someone who knew how to read her breathing. B was already there. Colby texted me a single sentence when I pulled into the church lot. I'm inside. I won't leave. Street Bartholomew smelled exactly the way I remembered. Coffee, floor polish, old hymnals, and women's perfume warmed under Sunday clothes. In the fellowship hall, someone had hung a banner across the front wall. Welcome home, Mara. The letters were blue and silver, cheerful enough to make my stomach turn. A long table held pound cake, fruit trays, and a silver coffee urn. People turned when I walked in. Some smiled with wet eyes. Some looked curious. Some looked disappointed that I did not appear more ruined. That was the thing about being declared lost. People expect you to return looking grateful for the search. Mom stood near the banner in a cream dress, one hand pressed to her chest like she had rehearsed restraint. Priscilla Vance held a microphone even though the room was small enough for whispers. Our wandering child has come home, she said, voice trembling with borrowed sorrow. A murmur moved through the room. I felt Lenora step closer behind me. Bee sat in the second row with her old Bible across her lap. Colby stood near the coffee table, face pale, hands jammed in his pockets like he was afraid they might start shaking where everyone could see. Mom came toward me with open arms. I did not move into them. That was the first sound the room made. The quiet surprise of people realizing a script had been skipped. Mom's smile tightened. Mara, she whispered, not here. I looked past her at the banner, at Priscilla's microphone, at all the women who had prayed over a version of me my mother invented. This is exactly here, I said. This is where you told it. Priscilla's mouth opened, but no words came out right away. That might have been the first miracle Street Bartholomew had seen all year. Mom's eyes flashed once, quick enough that only a daughter would catch it. Then the sad face returned. Sweetheart, grief confused you, she said louder, for the room. You stopped communicating. We were terrified. I heard a few soft gasps behind me, sympathy moving toward her by habit. My hands were cold, but my voice did not break. I didn't disappear, I said. I stopped paying. The room went still in a way no prayer had ever made it still. Coffee stopped pouring. Someone's chair creaked and then froze. Mom whispered my name like a warning. In my family, I said, those became the same thing. I set the canvas tote on the front table beside the pound cake. The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. 7 years of my life, sitting next to lemon glaze and paper napkins. Mom reached for my wrist. I stepped back. Don't, I said quietly. You asked me to come stand with you. I came, but I'm not standing inside your lie. Then I opened the tote and took out the green notebook. My mother stared at it like she recognized an enemy she had never bothered to respect. I opened the green notebook to the first page. My handwriting from 2016 looked younger, rounder, almost hopeful. June 10th. I read, $600, first paycheck. A woman near the coffee urn made a small sound, like she had swallowed wrong. I turned the pages slowly. 800, 1150, 2300. 4,800. Roof deposit. Medicine. Insurance. Emergency. The words my mother had used to dress up need until it looked like duty. By August of 2019, I said, I had sent my parents $92,640. The number hit the room harder than any accusation could have. Mom's face changed, not into guilt, but calculation. Family helps family, she said. Her voice had lost its church softness. Help is asked for, I said. This was collected. I laid the bank records beside the notebook, each transfer printed with dates and confirmation numbers. Then I held up the screenshot from February 2019. This was for a roof repair deposit. I looked at my father, who had come in late and was standing by the back wall. Dad, did the roof get fixed with that money? Leland stared at the floor. Colby answered instead, his voice rough. No. I patched it myself later for under 400. The room shifted. Not loudly. Worse. Honestly. Priscilla lowered the microphone, as if it had become heavy. Mom turned on Colby first. You don't understand what we were dealing with, He shook his head. I understand enough. Then I placed the next page on the table. The text after Jonah's funeral, printed black and plain. I read it because some cruelty needs air before people believe it. I'm so sorry about your friend. Will this month's transfer still come on the 1st? Nobody spoke. Not even Mom. For 1 second, she looked smaller than her own story. Then B stood. It took her time, and the room gave it to her. She held the old Bible against her chest and walked to the front with Colby beside her, ready to catch her if her hip betrayed her. I have Mara's letter, she said. From 2019, I have photographs of her son from every year after. She opened to the Book of Ruth and took out the envelope, the Christmas cards, the pictures. Elias in red blankets. Elias with marker on his chin. Elias alive. Marcy saw these in 2024, Bea said. She knew where Mara was. She put them back and kept letting you pray for a daughter she knew was not lost. That was when Priscilla finally found her voice, but it came out thin. Marcy told us she had no way to reach you. I looked at her then, really looked at her. You enjoyed her story because it gave you a villain, I said. A selfish daughter, a broken family, a mother to pity. You built meetings around me without ever asking me one question. Priscilla's face flushed dark beneath her powder. Mom whispered, "Enough." I turned back to my father. Dad, you watched her do this to me. He opened his mouth, closed it, and aged 10 years in that silence. I gathered the papers, but left the notebook open on the table. I wanted them to see the lines. I wanted them to understand that I had not come with a speech. I had come with math. I was not missing, I said. I was working. I was grieving. I was pregnant. I was raising a child you turned into a rumor. Mom began to cry then, but the room did not move toward her the way it used to. That was the first consequence. Not punishment. Consequence. The difference is that punishment wants pain. Consequence only gives the truth somewhere to land. I left Street Bartholomew before anyone could turn the truth into another ceremony. Lenora walked beside me, not touching me, just close enough that I knew she would if my knees forgot their job. In the parking lot, Colby caught up with us. His face was blotched and wet, but for once he did not look like the favored son. He looked like a man standing in the wreckage of a house he had helped keep clean from the outside. Mara, he said, I'm sorry. I nodded, because I believed he meant it. Believing him did not make him safe yet. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came in whispers, then phone calls, then empty chairs. Priscilla stepped down from the women's ministry after 3 members asked to see the posts she had written about me. Mom stopped coordinating volunteer meals when families began requesting anyone else. Nobody made a public announcement. Churches rarely do. They just shifted the keys, changed the group text, and stopped asking certain women to speak first. For my mother, who had lived on being seen as useful and wounded, that silence was louder than any judgment I could have written. Dad sent one text, 3 weeks later. I'm sorry I looked away. That was all. No explanation, no request, no promise to change what had already happened. I stared at it for a long time, then saved it in the folder with everything else. Colby started driving to Savannah on Sundays, never without asking first. He brought groceries once, and I made him take them back to his car until he understood that gifts were not tickets. Eventually, he began sending $200 a month toward what he admitted he had benefited from. I did not call it repayment. I called it practice. Mom mailed a letter in October. 4 pages, blue ink. No apology that did not end with her feelings. She wrote that she had been scared, humiliated, abandoned by my silence. She wrote that people had misunderstood her grief. She wrote Elias deserved a grandmother. I read it at the kitchen table while Elias colored a dinosaur purple beside me. At the bottom, she had written, I needed you. I folded the pages back into the envelope and felt no pull to rescue her from the sentence she had finally told the truth inside. When she called that evening, I answered because fear had stopped being the person in charge of my hands. Her voice cracked when she said my name. Mara, I needed you. For years, that would have been enough to make me soften, apologize, rearrange myself into something useful. This time, I looked at my son, at the purple dinosaur, at Jonah's pocket watch resting on the windowsill. Being needed was never the same as being loved, Mom, I said. And I'm done paying for the difference. She cried. I did not hang up cruelly. I simply hung up free. That winter, Elias painted our porch railing yellow again, even though it was already yellow. He said it needed more sunshine. Lenora laughed from the steps. Colby held the paint tray without giving advice. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets and watched my son drag uneven color across old wood, layer over layer, until the porch looked almost too bright for the street. 7 years earlier, my family decided I disappeared because I stopped sending money home. But I did not disappear. I survived being erased. And survival, I learned, is not silence. Sometimes, survival is opening the door and letting the right people see you standing there. What this story leaves behind is not just anger at a mother who lied, or a father who looked away, or a community that prayed before it questioned. It leaves behind something quieter and more useful. The reminder that love should not require you to disappear from yourself. So many people grow up believing family means endless sacrifice. They are taught that being a good daughter, a good son, a good sibling, means saying yes before anyone even asks. They learn to confuse guilt with loyalty, silence with respect, and exhaustion with devotion. But real love does not keep a ledger hidden behind kind words. Real love may need help sometimes, but it does not turn help into ownership. It does not punish you for having limits. It does not call you selfish for choosing to survive. Mara's story matters because her breaking point was not loud. It was not revenge. It was a mother holding a baby inside her body and realizing that the old rules could no longer come first. Sometimes healing begins that quietly. Sometimes it begins when you do not press send. Sometimes it begins when you stop explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. And resilience is not always glamorous. Sometimes it looks like working another shift. Keeping screenshots, writing the truth in a notebook, letting a friend stand beside you when family refuses to. Raising a child in a yellow house while people miles away turn your name into a rumor. Survival is not just getting through the wound. It is refusing to let the wound become your identity. Family can be sacred, but only when it is honest. Love can be powerful, but only when it does not demand your disappearance as payment. And forgiveness, if it ever comes, should never be confused with handing someone the keys to hurt you again. So, if this story reminded you of your own life, your own family, or someone you once tried too hard to please, leave a comment below. Tell me what line stayed with you. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the truth we need most is the one someone else finally had the courage to say out loud.